Hi there, little berries. This is Eryberrie here, coming to you from the UK with very fluffy hair today. I've been away for so long on this channel, I do apologise. I did actually film this video 2 weeks ago, and I thought, you know what, I'll go and, get it edited, get it sorted. Oh, my audio again, completely screwed up. So I'm here having to do it again. But to be honest, I don't really mind that, because whenever I do these videos, my main focus is to make sure that I do the victim and their family justice, that I make sure I highlight as much as I can without droning and being too boring, obviously. But I wanted to make sure that the victim in this particular case, her story is told and justified, and I really hope that I can do that in this video. I will warn you now that this is a very graphic, very upsetting story. Very rare is it that I'm moved to tears by a particular story. I mean, I can be really deeply touched and everything, but this story really had me in tears. It was nothing like I've ever read before. Nothing like I'd ever seen about on television before. It's very sad, and I will say it does involve an honour killing, and that is something that I think we need to raise more awareness of. This is something that we need to address as a society. This can't happen. It really shouldn't be happening. If you don't want to hear about some really horrific stuff, you don't have to continue watching. Banaz Mahmod was born on the 16th of December 1985 in northern Iraq to a Kurdish Muslim family. I believe she was one of 7 siblings, mostly girls. And when she was 10 years old, her family moved from Iraq to the UK, and they lived in Wimbledon. Her family held honour above everything in their lives. In the Kurdish community in London, they were well known and well respected, and the women in such communities are expected to follow a particular code of conduct, behave and speak and dress and obey. They hold all the burden of this honour system, and if they don't uphold it, the consequences can be dire. Quite a lot of the time, women are put under surveillance and under watch. The community will often talk about people, and even if there is a rumour about a woman doing something inappropriate, it could be something simple like just talking to the opposite sex, or integrating a bit more into the Western world than they would agree to. That could be enough sometimes for her to become a victim of an honour crime. Women were often told that they should marry certain particular people, and the whole point is to protect the reputation and save face, make sure there is no embarrassment to the family, that whatever anyone does in a family, it has an effect on everyone else. Which is something I don't quite understand, because just because one person in a family behaves in a certain way doesn't mean that the rest of the family do. But that is something that Banaz's family held very true to their hearts. And Banaz, when she was 17, she was forced to marry a man who was much older than her, a man she didn't know, a man that had come from Iraq himself, and they pretty much married as soon as he arrived in the UK. Banaz was described as a very quiet young woman. She liked to get on with people. She didn't like confrontation. She didn't like arguing. She didn't raise her voice. She was a very kind, sweet, innocent girl. When she was growing up, the expectation was for her that she would marry someone of her, more specifically her father's choosing, live the life that they want her to live to uphold this honour system. Although Banaz loved her family were everything to her, and everything she did was purely for the love of her family, she wasn't happy about this marriage. I'm sure as many people would be if you're forced to marry someone you've never met. And then she was told she would have to live with him in Coventry, which is quite away from London. Although Banaz tried her best to be the best wife she could be for her family's sake and, you know, for her husband and for herself, unfortunately, Banaz was subjected to multiple accounts of sexual abuse, of violence. She was punched in the face once when she called her husband by his name in front of people, which he thought was disrespectful of her to do. She would endure ridicule and name-calling from her husband, and this went on and on and on. She complained to her parents that this was happening to her. She kept going back to London saying, I don't want to be in this marriage anymore. They would keep persuading her to go back to her husband. And each time she would try so hard to really be the best wife. She tried hard to, make sure he had his dinner on time and everything, but he would still just force her to have sex when he wanted, she didn't want it. And eventually one day she had enough and then went back to her family. At one point, her husband was actually questioned by the family as to why he was being abusive, and he actually admitted that he was abusing Banaz, but he said it's because she deserved it. So the family, as far as they were concerned, because of this honor system, if Banaz left her husband, it would bring shame on both the families, both his and hers. And it was Banaz's fault, even though she's the victim. And sometimes if a wife is being beaten, that can be looked at as shameful, but not because the husband's beating the wife, but because it may look as if the wife is behaving in a certain way that means that she deserves this kind of behavior, which again I don't understand. She never officially divorced her husband. That never actually happened, but she went back to her family. But unfortunately, she didn't really have much going for her because she didn't have a job. She'd left school at this point. She was about 18, 19 years old, and she wasn't training. She wasn't going to a college or anything. So everything she did was for her family. The house that her family lived in was not big enough to accommodate everybody. She had to sleep on the living room floor. One day, when there was a big family get-together, she met a man called Rahmat Sulemani, and she was so besotted by him. It was mutual. These two people met and fell in love. He was a family friend, but he was certainly not someone the family would welcome into their own. They would not approve him and Banaz being together. These two people were so in love. They couldn't keep apart from each other. They would text each other every day. Banaz would call him her prince. She would message him with kisses every single day. And even at this point, Banaz was a family weren't very happy with the fact that she had left her husband. So already she wasn't doing that well as far as they were concerned. But when her family saw her kissing Rahmat at a London tube station, because she'd been followed by certain members of her family, whenever she went out, she was followed. And the word got back to her family, which was her father, Mahmod, and also his younger brother, Eryberrie, who was the head of the family, even though he was younger, but I presume that was because he had a lot more power. This couldn't happen. As far as the family was concerned, no, this should not be happening. Banaz actually overheard Ari on the phone with her mother saying that Banaz and Rahmat were going to die for being together. This terrified Banaz. She went to the Metropolitan Police with a letter, and she had named the people. I believe there were 4 or 5 people, and she named them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, who were willing to kill her and Rahmat. She went to the police so many times to say, this is what my family are doing. And she also tried to bring charges to her ex-husband for the abuse that she suffered. But the police, they let her down big time. They didn't follow through with any of those leads. At one point, they sat on her verbal statement for 3 months before typing it up for her to sign, which in my mind is just absolutely disgusting. And she was crying out for help, saying, I'm going to be killed. My family are following me. They are stalking me. They have said they're going to kill me. I need you to help me. What they should have done was taken her into protection, but they didn't do that. They just kept sending her back to her family. On New Year's Eve 2005, Banaz's father picked up Banaz from wherever she was or at her house and drove her through a route that would not be picked up by security cameras to her grandmother's house. He had given her a suitcase that he wanted her to carry. He asked her to switch off and turn over her mobile phone to him, which she did. He told her to go into her grandma's house, which apparently was empty. Banaz, I would assume at this point, must have been absolutely terrified. She'd heard that her father and so many other people in the family were willing to kill her. Her father was one of the people she had named on that letter that she handed to the police. I can only imagine what was going through her mind, that she was terrified. This was late at night as well, and she was told to go and sit in the living room. He gave her a bottle of brandy and he made her drink all of it, so she was just incapacitated to the point that she would be more compliant. He put on surgical gloves, then he stood behind her and told her to not look at him and not move. But because she was drunk at this point, she wasn't quite sure what was going on. She saw him leave the room, and I'm not quite sure why he left the room, but then Banaz looked around her and she saw the key in the back door. She ran to the back door, opened it, and just ran out into the garden. She tried to get attention from a neighbour by banging on the window, which ultimately resulted in the window breaking, and she cut her wrist quite badly. She was barefoot. She climbed over some fences and gates as much as she could, and she ran as fast as she could to the main road where there was a restaurant. And as she reached the restaurant, she was banging on that window, screaming for help, bleeding, pleading, and then collapsed on the floor of the restaurant. Banaz was taken to hospital, and her boyfriend Rahmat went there to see her, and he actually videotaped on his phone how she described the assault on her, which is pretty much like what I'd said, but she elaborated a bit more about what her father was wearing. When she told the police and the staff about this, I mean, it was very clear that she was absolutely, they were so worried about how terrified she was that she had to have security with her at the hospital. And she was telling the police, my father was about to kill me. That's why he gave me brandy. But the police officer to whom she reported this didn't believe her. They believed that Banaz had a bit too much to drink and was making up a story just so she'd be let off. You know, that it was all hyperbole, that this was all false. Her father had just made an attempt on her life, and the police didn't believe her. Now that makes me extremely angry. In addition to all of this, Rahmat was also approached by the family and threatened. They said they were going to kill him. They weren't going to kill him then, but they were going to. Rahmat went to the police, Banaz went to the police about that, and the threat on Rahmat's life seemed to have been taken more seriously than the attempt on Banaz's life. After this ordeal, even though, Banaz, she actually went to stay with Rahmat, but unfortunately, as she had no job, she wasn't able to support them both. Ultimately, she did go back to her family, but that was because one day her family agreed to meet her in a McDonald's in London, and they said to her that nothing will happen to you. They said nothing will happen to you if you come home, and Rahmat was there with her. Even though this was a relationship her family did not agree to, did not approve of, they believed she was bringing shame on the family. Banaz's father actually took Rahmat's hand and kissed it and apologised for the threat on his life and apologised for what happened to Banaz. So Rahmat and Banaz thought, at least for now, that they were okay, but they still went to the police. And I don't blame them. I would too. She said she was going to come back the next day to sign the statement, but she never showed up. Rahmat was the first person to realise something was not quite right, because Banaz would text him every single morning and say, "Good morning, my prince, I love you," or something along those lines. But she didn't text him. She didn't answer her phone calls. He knew something was wrong. He knew his girlfriend very well. He was the one who first alerted to the police that something must have happened to Banaz. The police searched around the area where they lived, even dragging the river in front of the house. They tried to talk to the family, but the family didn't seem to be interested in Banaz. They were saying, oh, she's probably staying with a friend or her boyfriend or whatever. She definitely wasn't staying with Rahmat. She actually had no friends. She wasn't staying with anybody. Nobody really seemed to be too concerned, and even when the police were searching the river right outside the house, the family never came out of the house. Nobody expressed concern for her, which outraged the woman who was in charge of the investigation, DCI Caroline Good. The police found absolutely nothing. They searched for so long and so long and so long. They had an idea that it was her family who were involved, but what they were looking for was that piece of crucial evidence, or even something from their own mouths that would say that they had done something to Banaz despite the promise they made her. One of Banaz's cousins, Mohammed Hammer, actually was arrested for the threat on Rahmat's life. He was remanded in custody, and what the police did was they began to tape his conversations with his family. The first conversation that they listened to, they found graphic and explicit detail about what had happened to Banaz. That very morning, the morning that Rahmat reported his girlfriend missing, Banaz had been asleep in the house and her family had left. Her father and mother had gone. I believe one of her sisters was still in the house. I'm not quite sure who. Banaz woke up to the noise of 3 men entering the house, one of them being Mohammed Hammer. Another one was another cousin, Muhammad Ali, and Omar Hussein. I'm pretty sure at that point, as soon as she saw them come into the house, she knew what was going to happen. The men raped and sodomized Banaz. They were hitting her, kicking her. She was crying and screaming. She was vomiting. And then eventually, when it came to killing her, they got a cord, tied it round her neck, pulled so tight that it cut into her neck, stamped on the back of her neck, and pulled and pulled and pulled. It took half an hour or more for her to die. On these phone calls, Mohammed Hammer was talking to the men about this, that he had done this with, and they were talking about it as if it was some sort of accomplishment. They were congratulating each other. They were boasting about it. This was just absolutely disgusting. When Banaz was dead, they stuffed her body into a suitcase and then took the suitcase out of the house. But there was no confirmation as to exactly where they took her body. The house was searched, no trace of Banaz was found. Banaz's father and uncle were both arrested for murder. Now, there was no body, so therefore they had to try and find one, but the taped conversations weren't yielding that much information, so the police turned to technology. Now, I've seen 2 different versions of this when I've been researching this case. One of them said it was mobile network information. Another one said it was sat-nav. It could have been both. Never know. Apparently, the 3 men who committed this crime were driving to and from Birmingham quite frequently. And they were going to a particular area of Birmingham. So the police took helicopters and searched from above the area where the boys would go to, trying to find something that would give them a clue as to why they were going there and if Banaz's body was in any of the gardens or within the houses that were there. They couldn't find anything. They came all the way back with nothing to show for it, so the only thing they could do was keep listening to those phone conversations. Mohammed Hammer and his family were talking about a pipe that had burst in the garden when they had buried Banaz's body in a suitcase. So what the police theorised was that they were going to and from Birmingham frequently to try and fix the pipe so that it wouldn't give away Banaz's location. But again, that really didn't help with the searches from the air because they didn't know exactly which house this was, which garden this was. Then, Mohammed Hammer said to one of the boys, "Did you remember to put the freezer back over the patio?" DCI Caroline Good, who was in charge of the case, as soon as she heard that, she knew exactly where Banaz's body was. The police, using their helicopters, had already scoured so many houses. They knew that they had seen a garden with a freezer over a patio. So they went straight there and began to dig. When they were digging, which they had to do very slowly and carefully, they found the burst pipe, which had been taped up as a way to sort of make a rudimentary repair. They knew that they were in the right place, so they carried on digging and carried on digging. And eventually they found Banaz's remains. Because of the burst pipe and the water, Banaz's body was in quite a bad condition. They couldn't get DNA from any assailants, so they had to go back to the evidence that Banaz had given to the police, and as well as the taped conversations. But Muhammad Ali and Omar Hussein had fled to Iraq. This began a 3-year search and attempt to extradite Omar Hussein and Muhammad Ali from Iraq to the UK to face trial. Also, what had happened in this time is that in excess of 50 people from Banaz's community flocked to the police station, not in support of Banaz, but in support of her murderers. So many people tried to get the charges dropped for the Mahmod family. So many people tried to defend them, what they did, or someone went, no, they didn't do this, Banaz is still out there. This was a lot more widespread. This was an incident that more people knew about. There were more people involved, and one other person was involved in moving Banaz's body. It eventually took 3 years. But Muhammad Ali and Omar Hussein were eventually extradited to the UK, the first time this had ever been done. DCI Caroline Good has often said that usually in murder cases, they try and solve the murder for the family, but Banaz's family were the ones who'd killed her, so they solved it for her. Rahmat Sulemani had to go into hiding after this, into witness protection, because his life was still at risk. And one other person who also had to go into witness protection was Banaz's sister Bakal. She had testified on behalf of her sister against her own family, and she still remains under witness protection to this day. I found out something while I was looking into this case, and it just added to the heartbreak. About 9 years after Banaz's murder, Rahmat Sulemani committed suicide. These 2 innocent lives were destroyed. Banaz was literally destroyed by her family because all she wanted to do was be happy. And Rahmat, he lost the love of his life. These 2 people were so deeply in love. They deserved to be together. They deserved to be happy. And yet it was robbed from them. And Rahmat, I presume he tried for 9 years to move on and just couldn't. And that just, I can't put into words. It's just awful. All 5 of the men who were actually involved in the murder, the 3 who actually killed Banaz, and also Banaz's father and uncle were all sentenced to life for murder, and also another family member was convicted for concealment of a corpse for helping to dispose of her body. I have also heard that there is going to be a documentary made not about Banaz, but about the police officer who brought her murderers to justice. And I understand there's been a lot of mixed response to that, particularly from some of Banaz's family, because some of them actually did love her, but they just couldn't do anything to help her. Is that it's focusing on the police officer rather than Banaz. Now, I can understand that completely, because Banaz was the victim. She was wronged on so many levels. She didn't deserve anything at all of what she got, and she deserves to be, for lack of a better term, honoured. But now I have to be careful how I say this. With dramas, even if they are based on real life events, they are made really for entertainment purposes, as well as awareness, and to make sure that people don't forget those who sadly lost their lives. But when you're creating a drama, and if you made Banaz the main character, and then after however long she's murdered, it just sort of ends on a low. Where's the reprieve? Where's the the positive coming out of the negative. And there isn't a positive really, because the poor girl died, her boyfriend committed suicide. There's that can never be undone. But I suppose what they're trying to focus on is that is the justice side of things, is bringing the people responsible to justice. And that is what drives a lot of people who do true crime vlogs, is that we are driven by justice, that we want to see results, even though it doesn't bring back the person that passed away. It at least means that the people who did it pay for what they've done, that they know that they're paying for what they're doing, that they are named, and for lack of a better term, shamed, that they are not able to do this to anyone else as well, that people are safe, and that the lives of their victims have not been in vain. So I think that's why they're doing it as well. Now, it'll be interesting to see. I don't know what I'd think about it. I hope that they make it very true to form, and I do hope that they show like flashbacks of Banaz, and that they make it not only about the police officer but about Banaz as well. But yeah, this is this is the saddest case I've ever read about, or it really just cut me up to read about it. I had to say something, and also about this so-called honor system. I don't get it. I really don't. Why are people so worried about what other people think? Why are people so worried about their reputation? And why do people look down on a whole family just because somebody's done something? Does it really matter what people think of you? You know, what's the worst thing that anyone can do? It doesn't mean that they're not family. It doesn't mean that you don't love them. And for some reason, a woman leaving her abusive husband is more shameful for her, rather, you know, she should have stayed with her abusive husband. That is just disgusting. It really is. Just stop worrying about what people think of you. Just, life is more important. Happiness and love is more important than reputation and how you look, and being safe from embarrassment and shame and scandal. It's because of how people think. If people just change their mindset and just focused on health and happiness and love, then, you know, I could go on forever. But I wanted to add to the awareness of Banaz's case. There's so many honour victims, like Shafilia Ahmed, for example. My favourite true crime vlogger, Ellen O'Neill, covered her story. So I'm not going to do Shafilia Ahmed because Ellen O'Neill did a fantastic job on her channel. There's no way I could top that. Mostly the victims are women. There are occasionally men, for example, men who are found to be homosexual. But most of the time it's the women, and I just don't understand it. I really don't. I would urge you to research Banaz's case and many other honour cases. Something needs to be done, and I'm hoping that this drama that is made does that. It raises a lot more awareness about honour, and I'm pleased that the police are actually They actually have classes and lectures about how to recognise potential victims of honour killings. Many of them probably don't go reported because it's the family that have killed them, and usually a family are the ones that report them missing in the first place. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Thank you, good night, goodbye.